So guys, the assignment, drawing the threads together, we've covered quite a lot this semester. And you've got almost all of the lectures now videoed. We'll do the Week 7 one again for you. Well, not again, but I will do a Week 7 version quietly in the lab and get it posted up there, so you'll then have the whole set. What I want to do is just look through the assignment, see how we pull the various parts of those academic sort of frameworks together so we can deliver a really fantastic piece of work. So here is a specification of the assignment. And so it starts off with you needing to think about IT-related service that can improve the student experience here at the University of Derby, because you had a year and a half's experience of the sort of systems we have that supposedly help you, whether it's a university app on a smart device or whether it's the new interface for Udo for you, things like that. Or it could be the way the library works, the library systems work, the way that Blackboard does or doesn't support you in the things you need to do, whether the e-library stuff in terms of, say, access to academic journals works or doesn't work terribly well. There's lots and lots of things that you've been doing and getting used to. So first of all, think about something that can be improved, or maybe a brand new service that needs some IT to help you. The second part is really then, okay, right, if that's what I want to do, to improve or to create something new, then what are the technology elements that are actually necessary to deliver this service? And you need to separate out what the service is, the thing that's going to do something for somebody, referring back, of course, to definitions of what a service is, and the technologies, which are just the sort of techie things that kind of help us to get things done. And then, having looked at what you're trying to do in terms of the service, also then justify the technologies which will help you deliver the service efficiently and effectively. And by justify, I mean critically evaluate the technologies, their strengths, their weaknesses in the context of your chosen improved service. So, different technologies have strengths and weaknesses in various directions, but particularly in relation to a context. It's very difficult to critically evaluate a technology if you don't know what it's going to be used for. So that's why it's justifying it in the context of that service you want to do. So, first of all, those are the critical things. Oh, and then thinking about the Zachman architecture, which, remember, has those 6 columns about time, the answers to those 6 questions, the who, why, what, where, when type of questions. Remembering you're using the top 2 levels of the Zachman architecture framework, and that can help you to justify and provide the overall enterprise architecture aspects in terms of the owner and the architect type of person that's involved, which is where your role really will come in as graduates of BSc IT. And you can use the Zachman architecture framework actually in some quite interesting ways to justify how you're going to support the thing. It can even give you ideas in relation to cost justification. It can give you ideas in relation to who should be using it, who the stakeholders are. There's lots of interesting ways that you can use that architecture. And so use those to justify, I explain why they're great, with reasons. So here is your new design, essentially. So the problem and the benefits, the opportunities, the way that you can use technologies to help satisfy that new service need, the way that you can connect those architectures or those technologies together to deliver the service, and then identify and justify how you are going to actually measure the success of this new service. And this actually is the area, in previous years, a lot of people have forgotten to do very much for that. it's really, really important because, again, we started off with failure as a way of understanding the things that we need to actually work with, to improve, to do better. And so those first 2 weeks that we worked on, why did those services fail, whether it's the ambulance service in London, or whether it was Heathrow, Terminal 5, or whether Denver International Airport, or many, many other failures of IT services for all sorts of reasons, whether technology, over-optimism, over-ambitious projects in unreasonable timescales, with unreasonable budgets. Now, there's lots and lots of things that cause services to fail, and you'll want to feed those in here. So Standish Group we started with, some of those ideas from the Standish Group reports help us to sort out what we're going to do with that service. So what I've said here is there are 4 critical chapters. There will be a small wrap-up chapter at the end of section, the conclusions, but these 3 basically map nicely, or these 4, sorry, map nicely to that explanation or specification at the top, and gives you some key ideas as to how you go about writing this assignment. 4 chapters are the ones that I really expect to see. I would like to see a conclusion, because that's a little summary of the critical and most important points that you want your reader to remember. If they forget everything else, as long as they remember what you've drawn together in that conclusion, then that will be really helpful. Now, remember again in the context that the best of these will all be collected together, and with a bit of luck, if one of you volunteers to edit it together into an e-book, we'll be able to publish it sometime next semester with a bit of luck. Depends how your workload goes as to whether you want to able to do it during the semester or whether you think you'll do it during the summer. I don't really mind. Your predecessor still hasn't actually delivered it to me from last year, which is a pity, because there's some quite good ones. And these will be up there so that people will be able to see, the way that you are actually thinking and analysing services, technology evaluations, overall architectural design issues based on the 6 questions that Zachman raises, and interesting, maybe innovative ideas for how you measure the success of that project. Now remember, we started off, I'll now go through some of the weeks that we've had and the topics we've covered during the various weeks this term. We started off with failure of projects, to find out why project failed, and these give us some really great ideas in terms of thinking about what do we actually need to do to avoid those problems. Bear in mind, only about 35% of projects are successful these days, and have been for the last 20 odd years. They don't necessarily tell us an awful lot, although Standish Group regularly summarise the lessons learned from previous sort of surveys, which they do every year, where what the things are that are important for success, but they also, and more importantly, identify some of the causes of failure. And those are the things that you can actually do something with, because those are things that we can actually highlight at the beginning of a project. So we need to actually address some of these issues so that we do not fall into the challenged or failed category. So then you start thinking about, okay, what was it we wanted to do as a service? A lot of thinking about the app. Some people are thinking about other aspects, maybe that UDO interface, which kind of is bizarre. It raises questions again about the user interface, and so that links across to the stuff you're doing with Dennis in IT product design, where you're thinking about the interface and a way of making things effective. That team project you're doing at the moment, again, is all about, or many of your projects are about the interface that makes the thing work for your client. We then looked at, what did we look at? Let's have a look at some of the other areas we looked at. Let's go through the... We looked at, in week 4, at IT services for business needs. So this gives you some frameworks, some questions to help you to ensure that you're actually designing that sort of thing appropriately for the various stakeholders who are involved in your new service. Week 6, jumping one, we then looked at who stakeholders are and what their characteristics are and their needs, whether it's the owner at the very top of the Zachman architecture, they're looking for something that's successful, that delivers benefits to somebody, another stakeholder, which leads you to think about what do the user stakeholders' needs look like, how do I best meet them. Going back, we then, in week 5, we looked at enterprise architecture, the Zachman architecture, in considerable detail, which again gives you a whole set of questions which you can then use as you do your design, as you do this section particularly. Then we looked at something that's really, really important in week 7. We looked at the question of the technology acceptance model, TAM and UTA-UT. Now those are really important as you think about them, because they feed forward both into the design, but also, just as critically, they give you a lot of hints about measuring a successful service. Is it easy to use? Yeah, great, sometimes. Maybe not sometimes, because the design's not very good. But think about some of those other aspects of the UTA-UT and the technology acceptance model about, now, why should I use it? What's in it for me? To paraphrase some of the terminology that's actually given to you in TAM and AT-UT. So you might want to think about those as other questions that you might be building into your approach to measuring the success. You might even think about using them in some of your designs for your team project as well, come to think of it. I mean, between this module and Dennis's module, you've got almost everything you need for your team project module. Because you're dealing with real people, real stakeholders who've got a real business need. And so all of the stuff you're doing here is actually going to be really valuable to develop a better design perhaps, a better implementation, a better, more effective system to do whatever it is your projects are doing for your clients. So that's really pulling those lot together. Then we've sort of talked about delivery. How do you actually set up the delivery of your service? Do you basically shunt it outside the organization to some sort of subcontractor? Do you get it hosted outside the organization? All sorts of questions about how do you actually deliver this. That comes into here. And then we looked a little bit about measuring success. There was some checklists about the different requirements of different stakeholders, different, again, questions that you could use as part of the justification of this. So that really, in a sort of a nutshell, is what I'm really looking for. I would like you to draw upon every single week's worth of material we've covered this term, because each of those will help you answer different parts of those 4 critical chapters. And if you think about them, then we'll move on a little bit to the other end of the marking scheme. Well, just remind you, 5 pages in the Springer LNCS template, excluding the front sheet and bibliography. So the front sheet, which includes your table of contents, is outside. So the word count or the page count starts with your abstract. and goes through to the end of your conclusion. So if you've got lots and lots of subsections, so your table of contents is a page and a half, doesn't matter. The page count starts at the beginning of the abstract, which is at the top of a new page after your various titles and your name and University of Derby, your Unimail, email address, and so on. Your page count has to be absolutely no more than 5 pages.
Why is that? Why is the reason you don't want more than 5?
Because there are often various standards, part of actually employability. In terms of, now, for publication, I want to have a pretty looking e-book. So that, and these are the standards. I mean, for example, if you actually have a Springer publication, a journal article, it will be no more than 12 pages or 10 pages. And if you go over the 10 pages, that will include the bibliography, then they'll charge you $100 per page in excess of the 10 pages. And often out there in business, you will be given very hard limits. It also helps you to actually get to grips with the idea of being concise. Yeah, no waffle, exactly. And it helps because there's a lot you want to cover in here. You know, 5 pages in this format is going to be close on to just over 2,500 words, maybe 2,800 words, or thereabouts.
Okay.
It depends how many subsections you have, actually, because the subsections and so on tend to take quite a lot of white space. So, you know, that's one area where you could claw back.
Do you have to have loads of subsections? Say, for instance, just introduction, then evaluation of technology. Could you just do that? Do you have to have these?
You could do that if you wanted to. Again, it's up to you. Subsections are a way, typically, of highlighting to your reader, I'm changing topics slightly.
So, for instance, evaluation, and I started talking about mobile devices and laptops. Would that be 2 different subheadings, or would that not really need to be subheadings?
It depends on exactly what you're trying to do. I mean, if you think about what the table of contents does, which will reflect your headings, your subheadings, your sub-subheadings, then that provides your reader, if you do those, choose the words well in each of those subheadings and sub-subheadings and so on.
Area where which stuff is.
Yeah, it helps the reader to build a mental model in their head before they get really into the reading the words, so that they can then read the words knowing how it fits together. So the table of contents is actually a very useful framework often to help the reader understand the logical approach that you're taking. So it can, you know, if you have a couple of well-judged subheadings, it may actually save an awful lot of other words. You may, although it may appear to take up that much space, you know, 2 or 3 lines worth of space, it may actually save you writing 4 or 5 lines, if you're really careful.
Word count. I need that word count.
It's writing concisely, and again, you know, when you go out to your jobs next year, your placement year, employers really don't like waffle. They really don't like irrelevancies, and this will force you into being really, really concise. And it will force you also to get your syntax, your grammar, your spelling really accurate as well, to make it a really good read, and a read that can be read, an article that can be read quickly and efficiently, that gets your message across, justifying a new design, why you're doing it that way, and then this is how we're going to make sure, or measure in the post-implementation review process, that it actually met its objectives, it met the cost, it met the usability, it's now being used by a large number, you know, 60, 70, 80, 90% or whatever. And yes, their responses to it in a survey maybe is a fabulous thing, or there are a few areas.
Do you know, based on the 4 questions, what sort of word count you would averagely say each one should sort of consider? Is it?
Well, what we'll do in a minute, we'll look at the actual
so I don't know if my
grade
is too big or.
Let's have a look in a minute, another clue that helps you answer that.
Yeah.
So, there's that. This tells you, just remember all of those things. The bibliography, or the list of references, is a list of those sources that you have actually cited. It is not a list of all sorts of interesting reading which you came across while you're doing your research, but you haven't actually cited in the text. Now, if you've done a great piece of research and end up with, say, 50 or 60 sources, and your bibliography only or the references only contains 10 sources, there's a question: what was it about your research, or your writing, or your citations, where you haven't been able to use more of them? Think about why the citations are actually there. They're there to show your reader where the ideas came from, so that they, if they are interested, can go and find them and read up on them. And essentially, you must remember that every single idea that you introduce into your writing, into this critical evaluation of a new service, its design and its effectiveness afterwards, every idea needs to have a source where you got that idea from, based on your research. And so, because we're looking at critical evaluation, i.e. comparing and contrasting ideas that you then bring together to say this is really what it all means, your synthesized conclusion, you can't do that with just one source. You need several sources, multiple perspectives, to show I got these ideas from here and there, and they come together like this. So every paragraph, where in English a paragraph is designed to contain a thought or a concept, that means you need to have at least one citation per paragraph if you're just doing description. If you're doing critical evaluation, then you probably should expect to have several sources, several citations in each paragraph.
And what sort of size is a paragraph are we talking, like?
2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10 lines? It depends. I do not expect to see...
Like a decent sized paragraph.
Yeah, I want reasonable, yes, several sentences in a paragraph, but you do not want to have a paragraph which is a whole page. 500 words worth of paragraph is kind of heavy going. It's difficult for people to cope with paragraphs that size for some reason. We like to have them smaller generally. Now, what this tells you is that, yeah, you've got the presentation, which is meeting the template style perfectly, not going over the 5-page for content, not being too short, i.e. no more than 4 or 5 lines less than the 5 pages, and all the other things that you'll see further down the column. But in terms of your critical chapters, those 4 chapters that you've got, I'm giving you 20% weighting for each of those.
Actually individually important. So
they're all exactly individually important, about equal weight.
So roughly, it's just for argument's sake, say if there's 4, there'd be 600 or more, 650 words.
Something of that order, yes. I mean, if you think back to Intro to Computer Science last year, you had 20% for presentation, 20% for context, and 60% for the critical evaluation, or the way that you presented it or provided the story. And that really meant, you think about, okay, so I've got to do a little bit, 1/4 on the sort of contexty side, and then 3/4 on the main side. Whereas here, 20-20-20, that means equal amount of effort on each of those 4 areas. And if you look at our marking schemes, which are done in this sort of fashion, then this gives you a really good clue to how you should actually devote your time. How much time to each section? How many words or paragraphs or pages to each section? So it's just over 1.25 pages, or around about 1.25 pages for each section, folks, broadly speaking. And I'm sure none of you are going to drop into the penalty level here of having no citations.
Of course not. First line citation. 40%.
But do remember, there ought to be a reasonable amount of support in terms of citation density. And remember that what you're really aiming for is this quality in terms of each of your sections. This is what you're really looking at. So we're looking at these sort of things here in terms of the introduction and benefits. But I want you to think about appreciation, understanding, application of the technologies. For example, in the second column, obviously in all of them, very strong comparing, contrasting in terms of that critical analysis. And remember that critical analysis is really identifying consequences and impact, not description. So you're not writing this in a purely descriptive fashion. This is what the technology is about. Yeah, I know it's that, but what does it mean in the context of your design? So that's what we mean when we talk about very good, very strong critical analysis and justification and so on. It's thinking about consequences, thinking about impact. You do that, you'll do well. And so, okay guys, any questions? Yeah. I will do, yes. Yeah.
Simple.
Okay.